Welcome to the new podcast show, The Truth with Dr. Ruth. Join us in the chat room as she shares her personal stories and thought-provoking discussions on various topics. Feel free to explore these podcasts and join the engaging conversations. Invite a friend to our discussion that goes beyond conventional narratives, fostering a community where truth and understanding prevail on the podcast show, The Truth with Dr. Ruth. See you there.
The Barbados-Carolinas connection. The connection stems from historical, cultural, and economic ties that date back to the colonial period. I will give some key points on the connection. Colonial settlement. During the 7th century, Barbados became an important English colony, establishing sugar plantations and becoming a center for the Atlantic slave trade. Many settlers and plantation owners from Barbados later relocated to the Carolina colonies, particularly South Carolina, in search of new land for agriculture and to escape overpopulation and soil depletion in Barbados. The plantation systems developed in Barbados, particularly regarding sugar cultivation, which influenced agricultural practices in the Carolinas. The experiences and knowledge gained in Barbados were applied to growing tobacco, rice, and indigo in the Carolinas, which became significant cash crops. The transatlantic slave trade supplied enslaved Hebrews, whom most people called or terms as African, who were not Africans but were the true Hebrews that left Israel and settled in Negroland and Timbuktu on the slave coast of Africa. The Africans, being jealous of the Hebrews, sold the Hebrews to the Europeans in the slave trade, to work on the plantations in Barbados and other Caribbean islands. Barbados helped supply labor for the plantations in South Carolina. The economies of both regions relied heavily on enslaved labor. Many enslaved individuals who worked on plantations in Barbados were subsequently taken to South Carolina to work on rice, indigo, and later, cotton plantations. Between the 1670s and 1700s, slave owners often brought enslaved Africans Hebrews from Barbados to South Carolina. Exact figures on the number of enslaved people taken can vary. However, it's known that by the early 18th century, South Carolina's population was heavily composed of enslaved people, with a large number having origins from Barbados. The migrations between Barbados and the Carolinas fostered cultural exchanges. This included influences in cuisine, music, and language. The Gullah culture, which developed among Hebrew African American communities in the coastal regions of the Carolinas, it has roots in Hebrew African traditions and the experiences of enslaved people, many of whom came from or had connections to Barbados. Over time, a significant number of Barbadians moved to the American colonies, including the Carolinas, contributing to the demographic makeup of the region. Overall, the historical relationship between Barbados and the Carolinas is complex, involving economic development, migration patterns, and intercultural influences that are still evident today. Detailed records of specific individuals who traveled from Barbados to the Carolinas, especially in the colonial period, were some prominent figures such as Sir John Colleton, one of the earliest and most notable figures associated with the migration from Barbados to South Carolina. He was an original proprietor of the Carolina colony and played a crucial role in its development during the late 17th century. He moved from Barbados to the Carolinas in the 1670s. William Sale, another early settler in South Carolina, Sale was a former governor of Bermuda who emigrated to South Carolina in the 1670s. He is often noted for his leadership in the colony's early years. The Carteret family, members of this family, notably Sir George Carteret, were significant landholders in both Barbados and the Carolinas. They were instrumental in the early land grants and the development of the Carolinas. Sir John Yeaman was a notable figure in the history of colonial South Carolina, primarily during the late 17th century. He is often recognized for his role as a plantation owner and politician, reflecting the broader patterns of migration and colonial development from the Barbados to the American colonies. Here are some details about him and his connections to the Carolinas. Sir John Yeaman was originally from England, but he later settled in Barbados, where he became a successful planter in the sugar industry. His experiences in Barbados were an added values to his activities in the Carolinas. Yeaman migration to South Carolina during a period when many plantation owners from Barbados were seeking new opportunities in the Carolinas due to overpopulation and the depletion of soil quality in Barbados. His political involvement became an influential figure in the colonial government of South Carolina. Yeaman served as a member of the South Carolina Assembly and was involved in the legislative process. His political activities reflect the importance of the plantation elite in shaping the colony's governance. Once in South Carolina, Yeaman shifted his focus from sugar to crops like rice and indigo, which became the primary cash crops of the region. His success in agriculture contributed to the economic prosperity of colonial South Carolina. The legacy of figures like Sir John Yeaman is evident in the patterns of settlement, agricultural practices, and political structures established in the Carolina colonies during the 17th century. As a planter and politician, he contributed to the establishment of the plantation system that would define the economy and society of the region. While there may be limited detailed records specifically outlining individual actions or effects of Sir John Yeaman's life, his role as a migrant from Barbados, a landholder, and a politician in South Carolina provides insight into the colonial era's complexities, including agricultural development and the socio-political landscape of the time. Many other planters and their families left Barbados for the Carolinas during the late 17th century, especially after the 1680s when the sugar industry in Barbados began to decline due to soil depletion and competition from other colonies. The migration was primarily driven by the desire for new agricultural opportunities and the availability of land. The transatlantic slave trade facilitated the movement of enslaved people from Africa to the Caribbean and the American colonies. Specific records detailing the exact number of enslaved individuals transported from Barbados to the Carolinas, or the names of those specific individuals, can be sparse or incomplete, especially during the early years of colonization. The transatlantic slave trade was poorly documented, and the records that do exist, like those from plantation owners, ship manifests, or government documents, might not provide exhaustive lists. I will also mention a little segue of the infamous Stede Bonnet, often referred to as the gentleman pirate, was a Barbadian pirate active during the early 18th century. His story is notable for its unique background, as he was not a typical seafaring man but rather a planter who turned to piracy. Here are some details about his life, background, and connections to the Carolinas. Early life. Stede Bonnet was born around 1688 in Bridgetown, Barbados, into a wealthy family. He inherited a substantial estate and was educated, which contrasted sharply with the typical backgrounds of many pirates of his time. His transition to piracy in 1716, having grown dissatisfied with his life as a planter, Bonnet decided to abandon his family and property and take to the seas. He purchased a ship, the Revenge, and turned to piracy, entering into the golden age of piracy. Bonnet started his piratical career in the Caribbean, raiding shipping vessels and engaging in battles with naval authorities. He was known for his somewhat genteel demeanor, which earned him his nickname. Unlike many pirates, he did not have a strong nautical background, which sometimes led to conflicts with his crew. He had alliances with other pirates during his time as a pirate. He had associations with well-known figures such as Blackbeard, Edward Teach. In 1717, he partnered with Blackbeard, who helped him enhance his piratical operations. Most of Bonnet's piratical activity took place in waters that included the Carolinas. He used ports like Charleston as bases for operations, taking advantage of the relatively permissive environment for piracy along the coastline at the time. Bonnet was eventually captured in 718 by naval forces off the coast of North Carolina. He was brought to trial in Charleston, South Carolina, where he was convicted of piracy. Despite his efforts to defend his actions, claiming he had been forced into piracy by Blackbeard, he was sentenced to death. Bonnet was hanged in December 718 in Charleston, marking the end of his brief and tumultuous career as a pirate. Stede Bonnet's story is notable for its portrayal of piracy and the complexities of individuals drawn into that life. His connection to the Carolinas, particularly Charleston, highlights the region's significance during the period of piracy in the Atlantic. Bonnet's life exemplifies themes of adventure, rebellion against social norms, and the interplay between piracy and colonial society during the era. Today, he is often romanticized in popular culture and literature, reflecting ongoing fascination with piracy and its colorful characters. His story has been portrayed in various media, celebrating the legacy of the so-called gentleman pirate. In tracing the intricate connections between Barbados, the Carolinas, and the enigmatic figure of Stede Bonnet, we uncover a compelling tapestry of colonial ambition, piracy, and societal transformation during the early 18th century. Bonnet's journey from a prosperous planter in Barbados to the notorious gentleman pirate encapsulates the allure and peril of a life at sea that many sought as an escape from the confines of colonial society. His exploits along the Carolina coast, particularly his interactions with the bustling port of Charleston, highlight the region's pivotal role as a hub of maritime trade and a sanctuary for those who lived outside the bounds of conventional law. In concluding our exploration of the connection between Barbados and the Carolinas, it becomes clear that this historical relationship has significantly shaped the cultural and economic landscape of the Carolinas as we know them today. The migration of laborers from Barbados during the colonial era introduced a diverse array of skills, traditions, and agricultural practices that laid the groundwork for the thriving plantations and communities in the Carolinas. These laborers, often navigating the complex dynamics of colonial society, played an essential role in cultivating crops such as rice and indigo, which became the backbone of the Carolinas' economy. Moreover, the intermingling of Barbadian customs and influences enriched the social fabric of the Carolinas, creating a unique blend of cultural identities that persists to this day. The legacy of resistance and resilience among those who labored in the Carolinas is a testament to their enduring impact on the region's history and development. As we reflect on this intricate shared history, we recognize the profound contributions made by those who journeyed from Barbados to the Carolinas, shaping not only the economy but also the cultural identity of the region. Their stories remind us of the interconnectedness of our histories and the vital role that diverse labor forces have played in forging the communities we inhabit today. Ultimately, the Barbados-Carolinas connection stands as a powerful example of how the legacies of the past continue to influence the present, inviting us to honor the contributions of all those who have helped shape the Carolinas into a vibrant and dynamic region. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Therefore, you would not miss out on new content. And whose truth? No other than Dr. Ruth.